The glass of grape juice flew directly toward my white dress. The purple liquid spread across the fabric like a stain of shame for everyone to see. Skylar Dupree, my own 8-year-old granddaughter, stared at me with a mischievous grin, holding the empty glass in her small hands. The silence lasted barely 2 seconds before the entire living room exploded in laughter. "Skylar, you are terrible!" My daughter-in-law, Tanisha Hayes Dupree, shrieked between bursts of laughter. But there wasn't a hint of a reprimand in her voice. Instead, she seemed proud of what her daughter had done. My son Marcus covered his mouth to hide his amusement, but his eyes glittered with enjoyment. The other guests pointed at my ruined dress and whispered comments they thought I couldn't hear. "Mommy said you don't belong here," Skylar murmured with that false innocence only a manipulated child can display. Her words echoed in my ears like church bells on a Sunday morning, clear and impossible to ignore. Tanisha didn't deny anything. She just kept laughing as she served more cake, acting as if ruining a 64-year-old woman's dress was the perfect entertainment for her birthday party. I stayed seated in that uncomfortable chair, feeling the juice stick to my skin and stain the dress I had bought especially for the occasion. I had spent $150 on that dress, money I truly couldn't afford, but I did it because I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I thought perhaps my family would treat me with respect for once in my life. How naive I had been. How foolish to believe that anything had changed after all these years of humiliations and disrespect. My hands trembled slightly as I got up from the chair, but I held my head high. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not in front of all these strangers who now had a funny story to tell in their own homes about the old woman who was humiliated at a birthday party. "Aren't you going to say anything, Grandma?" Skylar asked in that sweet voice that adults find adorable, but which I recognized as pure venom. The child had been coached for this. Someone had taught her exactly what to say and when to say it. My eyes drifted toward Tanisha, who continued to smile as she cut more pieces of cake, completely satisfied with the show she had orchestrated. "No, sweetie," I replied, in a voice so calm it surprised even me. "I don't have anything to say." I headed toward the kitchen to find something to clean myself with, but I knew the damage was done. The dress was ruined, my dignity trampled, and my heart broken once more by the family who was supposed to love me. In the kitchen, as I futilely rubbed the purple stains with a damp towel, I could hear the laughter continuing in the living room. Someone had turned the music up louder, as if they wanted to celebrate my humiliation with an included soundtrack. My hands moved automatically, wiping and rubbing, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was recalling all the times I had come to these family gatherings with hope in my heart, all the times I had brought gifts no one appreciated, food no one ate, and love no one wanted to receive. For years, I had believed the problem was me, that perhaps I didn't know how to approach my own family, that maybe I was too old or too boring to fit into their modern lives. But standing there in that kitchen, with my ruined dress and my pride in pieces, I finally understood the truth I had been denying for so many years. They didn't want me there. They never had. I was just a family obligation they tolerated out of manners, a burden they had to endure on special dates because it was the right thing to do. The music from the living room grew louder and the voices more cheerful. It was as if my absence had improved the party, as if they could finally relax and truly enjoy themselves now that the uncomfortable old woman was out of sight. Skylar was probably receiving congratulations for her mischief, and Tanisha would be telling the story over and over, adding dramatic details each time she repeated it. I left the towel on the counter and headed toward the front door. No one noticed when I grabbed my purse and keys. No one said goodbye when I opened the door. No one asked if I needed help or if I was okay. I just walked out of that house in silence, with my stained dress and my heart finally clear about what I had to do. The fresh night air hit my face as I reached my car. My hands trembled slightly as I searched for my keys in my bag, but it wasn't from sadness. It was something different. It was the feeling of someone who has finally woken up after a very long, very painful sleep. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me had dry eyes and an expression I hadn't seen in years: determination. That was what I saw in my reflection: pure, cold determination, like December ice. This wasn't the first time my family had treated me like I was invisible. As I drove back to my small apartment, memories began to flow like water from a broken dam. Every week for the last 5 years had been a repetition of the same humiliating pattern. The invitations always arrived at the last minute, as if I were an afterthought. "Essie, come over for Sunday dinner. Nothing special, just family." But I knew it was never nothing special to them. I was the filler, the person who completed the head count so the table didn't look so empty. I always arrived with something homemade, a dessert that had taken me hours to prepare, or an appetizer I had seen in a magazine and wanted to try. I spent between $30 and $50 each time on ingredients I truly couldn't afford, waking up at 5 in the morning to have everything ready. And each time, it was the same. They left my food in a corner of the table while everyone else rushed over the main dish brought by some other guest. "This looks so delicious," they would say, completely ignoring my contribution. By the end of the afternoon, my container always returned home with me, nearly untouched, with barely 1 or 2 servings taken out of courtesy. I remembered Marcus's birthday last year. I had spent $200 that I didn't have on a watch he had mentioned wanting. I took 2 buses to get to the downtown jewelry store because I couldn't afford a taxi, and I arrived home with swollen feet and a heart full of expectation. I thought that maybe, just maybe, my gift would be the one that excited him the most. When it was time to open gifts, Marcus unwrapped mine last, almost as a formality. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled, without even looking at the watch properly, and left it on the table to continue with Tanisha's gift. She had bought him a shirt that cost half of what I had spent, but he tried it on immediately and spent the rest of the afternoon showing it off to all the guests. My watch was forgotten among the crumpled wrapping paper and used napkins. No one else saw it. No one asked how much it had cost or where I had gotten it. To them, it was just another gift from old Essie, something they expected to receive, but that generated no real excitement or gratitude. Skylar's celebrations were even worse. Every time she had a school play or a swim meet, I was the only one who didn't receive a formal invitation. I would find out by chance when I overheard Marcus mentioning it on the phone, and I would have to timidly ask if I could go. "Sure, Mom, you can come if you want," he always said, with that tone that made it clear my presence was optional and not particularly desired. I arrived at those events with flowers I had bought with my grocery money, sitting in the back row while Marcus and Tanisha took the best seats in the front. When Skylar went on stage or stepped onto the podium, I clapped louder than anyone, my heart swelling with pride for my only granddaughter. But afterward, when everyone gathered for family photos, I was always left out of the frame. "It's just for the parents," Tanisha would explain with that fake smile she had perfected over the years. I would step aside and watch them pose for dozens of pictures that they would later upload to social media. In none of those images was there any evidence that Skylar had a grandmother who adored her and who had been there supporting her from the stands. Sunday family gatherings at Marcus's house were exercises in emotional endurance. I arrived promptly at 12 noon, as I had always been taught was correct, but the meal was never ready until 3 in the afternoon. While I waited, I would sit in the living room watching Marcus play video games with Skylar or Tanisha, talk on the phone with her friends about plans that didn't include me. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I always offered, but Tanisha rejected me with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry, Essie, everything is under control." So I sat there for hours, feeling like an old piece of furniture that no one wanted, but no one dared to throw away either. When they finally served the food, I always ended up in the most uncomfortable chair, usually the one near the kitchen, so I could help serve if necessary. Conversations flowed around my presence like water around a rock. They talked about people I didn't know, places I hadn't been, plans that didn't include me. "Remember when we went to that new restaurant last month? Marcus would ask Tanisha, and she would start telling a detailed story about a family dinner to which I hadn't been invited. I chewed my food in silence, wondering why I kept going to these gatherings that only served to remind me how little I mattered in their lives. But the worst of all was Christmas. For years, I had spent up to $500 on gifts for Marcus, Tanisha, and Skylar, money I had to save for months by working extra hours at my part-time office job. I wrapped each gift carefully, using expensive paper and elegant bows, writing personal cards with messages full of love. Their gifts for me always arrived unwrapped or hastily wrapped in newspaper. They were usually things they had bought at the last minute at the discount store, or worse, things they no longer wanted and decided to give to me. Once, Tanisha gave me a face cream that was half used, explaining that it hadn't worked well for her. But maybe I would like it. I smiled and thanked them, as if it were the most wonderful gift in the world, because that was what was expected of me, to be grateful, to be humble, to accept the crumbs of affection they decided to give me, and act as if it were a feast. Now, sitting in my car outside my apartment building, with my dress ruined by Skylar's grape juice, I could finally see the whole situation with crystal clarity. It wasn't love that kept me going to those meetings. It was fear. Fear of being completely alone. Fear of admitting that the family for whom I had sacrificed so much for so many years didn't truly want me. But tonight, something had changed inside me. Today's humiliation had been different because it was public and deliberate. It hadn't been just neglect or thoughtlessness. It had been pure cruelty, specifically designed to make me feel small and insignificant in front of strangers, and I had allowed it to happen. I had sat there accepting the mistreatment as if it were normal, as if it were what I deserved. But no more. The first time Marcus asked me for money, I was 58 years old and had just been widowed. My husband, Robert Bobby Dupree, had died of a heart attack while working in the garden one April morning, leaving me with a small inheritance and a loneliness that I thought my children would fill. How wrong I was. Marcus came to my house 3 weeks after the funeral with red eyes and a story about problems at his job. "Mom, I need $5,000. It's temporary. I swear I'll pay you back in 2 months." He looked so desperate, so vulnerable, that I couldn't say no. That money came from Robert's life insurance, money I had planned to use to fix the leaky roof and replace the old windows in the house. The 2 months turned into 6, then a year. When I finally dared to ask him about the money, Marcus got angry with me. "Seriously, you're going to pressure me for money when you just got widowed? I thought you wanted to help your family." Guilt consumed me for weeks. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe a good mother shouldn't worry about money when her son was in trouble. That was just the first of many emergencies that required my financial help. The next year, he needed $3,000 to pay off a credit card debt. Then it was $2,000 to cover the deposit for a bigger apartment, then $100 to fix his car. Each time he promised to pay me back, and each time I ended up waiting months without seeing a single dollar returned. But what hurt the most wasn't losing the money. It was the way they treated me after each loan. Instead of gratitude, I received indifference. Instead of respect, I received that condescending attitude that clearly said they expected my help as if it were their right, not my generosity. I vividly remembered the day Tanisha asked me to co-sign for their first house. She was barely 23 and didn't have enough credit history. "Essie, we need you to sign these papers. It's just a formality. You won't have to pay anything. We just need your name so the bank approves the loan." They took me to the bank office dressed in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Robert's funeral. The loan officer explained the terms of the contract, but I barely understood half of what he was saying. Marcus and Tanisha assured me it was routine, that thousands of parents did the same for their children every day. "Just sign here, Mom. Trust us." And I signed. I signed because I wanted to believe that they finally saw me as an important part of their lives. I signed because I thought maybe this would make them value me more. I signed because a naive part of me believed this would turn me into a grandmother that Skylar would remember fondly when she was older. For the first 2 years, Everything seemed to be going well. Marcus had a stable job at a local construction firm, and Tanisha worked part-time at a retail store. They made their monthly payments without problems, and I felt proud to have been able to help them get their first house. I finally had something concrete I had done for my family, something that truly mattered. But then Marcus lost his job. The company he worked for went bankrupt during the economic crisis, leaving dozens of employees without work and without the benefits they had been promised. Suddenly, mortgage payments became impossible to keep up with. I found out about the situation not because they told me directly, but because the bank called me as the co-signer. Ms. Dupree, the payments for the property you co-signed for on Elmwood Avenue are 3 months past due. If they are not brought current immediately, we will have to proceed with the foreclosure process. The bank employee's voice was cold and professional, but his words hit me like a hammer blow to the chest. When I confronted Marcus about the situation, he yelled at me for the first time in his adult life. "It's not my fault I lost my job. Do you think I wanted this to happen? And now you're pressuring me like I'm some kind of criminal." Tanisha was standing behind him with Skylar in her arms, looking at me as if I were responsible for all their problems. That night, I went home and calculated exactly how much money I had saved. If I paid the 3 months of back mortgage payments, I would have less than $1,000 left in my savings account. But if I didn't pay, they would lose the house and my credit would be ruined forever. I had no real option. I paid the $8,000 they owed, practically emptying all my emergency reserves. They thanked me. Marcus mumbled a "thank you" without looking me in the eye. Tanisha didn't even do that. They acted as if it had been my obligation to pay, as if signing as co-signer had automatically made me responsible for their financial errors. And the worst part was that, technically, they were right. The following months were a hell of constant calls from the bank. Every time Marcus and Tanisha were late on a payment, I was the first to find out. My phone would ring at 8 in the morning with bank employees reminding me of my contractual obligations, as if I were a professional debtor instead of a mother who had wanted to help her son. I had to get a second job cleaning offices at night to cover the payments when they couldn't. I arrived home at 11 at night with a sore back and hands cracked by the chemicals, all to keep afloat a house in which I was not welcome, because that was the ultimate insult. After all the money I had put in, after risking my financial stability for them, I was still treated like an awkward visitor when I went to their house. They never offered me a key. They never told me, "This is your home too." They never acknowledged that without my sacrifice, they would be living in a rented apartment or back with their parents. The situation worsened when they decided to remodel the kitchen. "It's an investment," Marcus explained when he asked me for another $4,000 for the new cabinets and appliances. "It's going to increase the property value." I knew it was a lie. I knew they simply wanted a nicer kitchen and expected me to pay for it. But I felt so trapped at that moment that I agreed. I worked double shifts for 6 months to raise that money. My feet swelled so much that I had to sleep with my legs elevated, and I developed chronic back pain that still bothers me to this day. All to pay for wood cabinets that Tanisha had seen in a magazine and decided she needed in her kitchen. The inauguration of the new kitchen was a party for 30 people to which I was not invited. I found out through the photos Marcus uploaded to Facebook, where everyone appeared to be toasting and celebrating the kitchen I had paid for. In one of the photos, Tanisha posed proudly next to the new granite island with a wine glass in her hand and a radiant smile. That night I called Marcus to ask him why I hadn't been invited. "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You know you don't like crowds." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The truth was that my presence would have been uncomfortable for them. How could they show off their new kitchen in front of their friends if the woman who had actually paid for it was there to remind them of the reality? That was the first time I truly considered the possibility that my family was using me. But even then, even with all the evidence before my eyes, I found ways to justify their behavior. "They're young," I told myself. "They don't understand the value of money yet. Someday they will thank me properly." How blind I had been, how desperate to be loved I had been, that I had confused being exploited with being needed. The moment everything changed forever was when Skylar turned 7. I had planned that celebration for months, saving every penny I could to buy her the perfect gift. I knew Skylar loved horses, so I spent $300 on a themed dollhouse I had seen at the downtown toy store. It was a beautiful piece with miniature stables, small horses of different colors, and even tiny leather saddles. The night before her birthday, I worked until 2 in the morning, wrapping each small piece separately so Skylar would have many little gifts to open. I used gold paper that I had bought especially for the occasion and tied each package with pink ribbons that matched the decor I knew Tanisha had chosen for the party. I arrived at the celebration with my arms full of perfectly wrapped packages, excited to see Skylar's face when she discovered what was inside. But from the moment I crossed the door, I knew something was different. Tanisha greeted me with a tense smile, and Marcus avoided eye contact with me completely. "Essie, so glad you made it," Tanisha said with that sweet fake voice she had perfected over the years. "Can you put the gifts over there on that table?" She pointed to a small table in the corner, far away from where all the other gifts were piled up. It was evident that my gifts were being segregated from the rest, as if they weren't good enough to mix with the others. The party was full of children Skylar's age and their parents, people I didn't know, but who were clearly part of Marcus and Tanisha's social circle. I sat in an isolated chair, watching my family interact naturally with these strangers while completely ignoring me. It was as if I were invisible, as if my presence had no impact on the atmosphere of the celebration. When it was time to open the gifts, Skylar went first to the main pile of presents. She opened a new bicycle that one of her friend's parents had given her, then a video game from her paternal aunt and uncle, then an expensive doll she had specifically asked for and that Marcus and Tanisha had bought her. Each gift was received with screams of joy and enthusiastic hugs. My gifts were left for last, almost as an obligation. Skylar approached the corner table with less enthusiasm than she had shown all afternoon. She began to open the small packages I had wrapped so carefully, but I could immediately notice that her interest was feigned. Other children had started to get bored, and some parents were already checking their phones. "How pretty, Grandma!" Skylar exclaimed each time she opened a piece, but her words sounded rehearsed, as if someone had coached her on what to say. There were no shouts of excitement, no genuine look of astonishment she had shown with the other gifts, just forced courtesy and smiles that didn't reach her eyes. What hurt the most was realizing that Skylar didn't even understand what the complete set was. To her, each little package was an individual gift unconnected to the others. The equestrian dollhouse I had envisioned as a magical play experience had become a disorganized collection of loose pieces that made no sense together. "Can I go play with my new bike?" Skylar asked, before finishing the last package. Tanisha immediately nodded, and all the children ran out to the backyard, leaving my gifts scattered on the table as if they were trash someone would have to clean up later. I sat there watching as the pieces of my perfect gift lay abandoned among the crumpled paper and untied ribbons, $300 thrown away. But what truly broke my heart wasn't the lost money, but the realization that nothing I did would ever be enough for this family. Marcus approached me as I tried to pick up the pieces of the dollhouse. "Mom, you didn't have to spend so much money. You know Skylar has plenty of toys." His tone was condescending, as if I were a silly old woman who didn't understand the real needs of a modern child. "Next time, it's better just to give us cash. It's more practical." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. After all the years of loans, co-signing, and financial sacrifices, Marcus had the nerve to suggest I simply give them money directly, instead of bothering to find meaningful gifts. To him, I had become nothing more than an ATM with legs. That night, when I arrived home with the remnants of the dollhouse Skylar had abandoned, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time in months. I didn't cry about the money spent or the rejected gift. I cried because I had finally understood that I was not a cherished grandmother in that house. I was a convenient provider of funds who was tolerated as long as I remained financially useful. The following months were a succession of increasingly brazen requests. Marcus needed money to fix the air conditioning. Tanisha wanted me to pay for Skylar's piano lessons. Skylar needed new clothes for the private school they had decided to send her to without consulting me, despite the fact that I was paying a significant part of her educational expenses. Each request was accompanied by the same attitude, that it was my responsibility as a mother and grandmother to provide these funds. They never presented themselves as favors or as loans that would someday be repaid. They were demands disguised as normal family requests. The last straw came when Tanisha asked me to pay for their family summer vacation. "Skylar has never been to the beach," she explained with that manipulative voice she had perfected. "All her friends are going with their families this summer. We don't want her to feel excluded." The vacation package cost $2,500. It was money I didn't have without completely emptying my emergency account, but the emotional pressure was overwhelming. The image of Skylar feeling left out of her classmates' conversations broke my heart. What kind of grandmother would let her granddaughter miss out on important experiences because of money? I paid for the vacation, working extra shifts for 3 months to cover that expense without being completely without savings. And while I worked extra hours cleaning offices until my knees ached, my family enjoyed a week in the Bahamas, uploading happy photos to social media from expensive restaurants and paradise beaches. Was I invited to join them? Of course not. "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You're not really a beach person," Marcus explained when they returned, tanned and relaxed, as if the fact that I had paid for the entire trip didn't even entitle me to be considered for an invitation. It was at that moment, seeing the photographs of my family's vacation, funded by me, but without me, that something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't love I felt for this family. It was an addiction to being needed, a desperation to maintain some kind of connection, even if it was toxic and unilateral. And now, after the humiliation of this night, after Skylar threw grape juice on me in front of strangers while my whole family laughed, the moment of truth had finally arrived. I could no longer deceive myself into thinking things would get better, or that someday they would properly thank me for everything I had sacrificed for them. It was time for them to learn how much they truly depended on the old Essie they loved to humiliate. On Monday morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't cried during the night or lost sleep, wondering if perhaps I had overreacted to the birthday events. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do and how I was going to do it. I had a quiet breakfast while reviewing all the documents I had kept in my safety deposit box for the past 6 years: loan contracts, bank transfer receipts, co-signer documents, receipts for payments I had made on behalf of Marcus and Tanisha. It was staggering to see it all together. I had spent more than $43,000 in total, keeping my family's financial life afloat. I made the first call at exactly 9 in the morning. I dialed the number for attorney Silas Jenkins, the lawyer who had handled my husband Robert's will. Silas was 72 years old, but his mind was still sharp as a scalpel. For the last few years, he had handled some minor matters for me, mainly related to my life insurance and some employment contracts. "Good morning, Attorney Jenkins. This is Estelle Dupree. I need you to help me with an urgent family matter. I need to review all the legal implications of withdrawing my name as the co-signer on my son's house mortgage." My voice sounded firmer than it had in months. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Silas had known Marcus since he was a child and knew how difficult my financial situation had been since Robert's death. "Estelle, are you sure you want to do this? Once you withdraw your co-signature, the bank could demand immediate payment of the full balance or proceed with foreclosure." "Exactly," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "That is precisely what I want to happen." I briefly explained the events of the previous day, without going into emotional details, sticking only to the concrete facts. Silas listened in silence, asking occasional questions about dates and amounts. "I understand your situation, Estelle. Let me review the original contracts and I'll tell you what options we have. You can come to my office this afternoon at 3. I confirmed the appointment and hung up, feeling more alive than I had in years. The second call was to the bank where Marcus and Tanisha held their mortgage. I asked to speak with the loan officer who had handled the original case, a man named Mr. David Sterling, who knew my co-signer payment history well. Mr. Sterling, I need information about the process for withdrawing as co-signer for the property on Elmwood Avenue. David sounded confused. For the past 3 years, I had been the one who always called when there were payment issues, the one who always found ways to cover the shortfalls. Ms. Dupree, is there a problem with the loan? The payments are current this month. There is no problem with the current payments, I explained calmly. I simply want to explore my legal options for withdrawing my responsibility as co-signer. David explained that it was technically possible, but it would require Marcus and Tanisha to qualify for the loan themselves or find another co-signer. If they couldn't do either, the bank would have the right to demand payment of the full outstanding balance. What is the current balance of the loan? I asked, though I already had an approximate idea. $137,000, Ms. Dupree. The figure impacted me, though it shouldn't have surprised me. Between the original mortgage, the cash-out refinances they had done, and the accrued interest over the years of irregular payments, the debt had grown considerably. I understand. Could you email me a complete statement of account and the necessary documentation to initiate the co-signer withdrawal process? David agreed, although I could detect concern in his voice. He was probably already calculating the chances of Marcus and Tanisha being able to handle that debt on their own. After hanging up, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my living room to process what I had just set in motion. I felt neither guilt nor regret, just a strange sense of liberation, as if I had been carrying an enormous weight for years and had finally given myself permission to drop it. For the first time in years, I went to sleep with a smile on my face. 3 weeks after signing the papers with Silas, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was Marcus, and his voice sounded completely different from the last time we had spoken. The casual confidence he always had when asking me for money or favors was gone. Now he sounded desperate and confused. "Mom, we got a letter from the bank. They say you're going to withdraw your co-signature from our house. This has to be a mistake, right? You would never do something like this without telling us first." His voice trembled slightly, and I could hear Tanisha yelling in the background about lawyers and lawsuits. "It is not a mistake, Marcus. The letter is correct." My response was quiet and direct. There was no need for long justifications or emotional explanations. The facts were clear enough on their own. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his accelerated breathing as he processed what I had just confirmed. "Why would you do this, Mom? Is it because of what happened at the party? That was just a kid's prank." Marcus was trying to minimize the incident, to turn it into an innocent child's mischief instead of the orchestrated public humiliation it truly was. "Of course, Marcus. Kids will be kids. I'm well." I kept my answer short and neutral. "Marcus, this has nothing to do with children's pranks. This has to do with the fact that for 6 years I have been financially responsible for a house where I am not welcome, where I am treated like a problem, where they allow me to be publicly humiliated without consequences." My voice was still calm, but there was a firmness in it that Marcus had never heard before. "But Mom, this is our home. Skylar grew up here. You can't do this." Now there was real panic in his voice. He was finally understanding that his mother was not the manipulable woman he had known all these years. "This is the house that I have been paying for 6 years, Marcus. A house you bought, remodeled, and enjoyed while I worked double shifts to cover the late payments. A house where you celebrated the inauguration of the kitchen I financed without even inviting me to see it. It is time for you to learn to be responsible for your own financial decisions." I hung up the phone before he could respond. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Tanisha, and her tone was completely different from Marcus's. Where he had shown panic, she showed pure rage. "Essie, how dare you do this? We are your family. You can't let Skylar lose her home over an old woman's tantrum." Her voice was venomous, full of that hostility she had always kept barely hidden beneath a facade of forced courtesy. "Tanisha, you decided that I don't have a place in that family. Now you are going to discover what it feels like to live without my financial support." My response infuriated her even more. "You are a bitter, selfish old woman. We always knew you were like this, but now you're proving it. You're going to destroy your own granddaughter's life for revenge." Tanisha was screaming so loud that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The only person who is going to destroy Skylar's life is her parents, who preferred to spend money they didn't have instead of teaching her respect for her grandmother. I hung up again, and this time I unplugged the landline. For the next few days, they tried every strategy to make me change my mind. Marcus showed up at my job, waiting for me in the parking lot with red eyes and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom, please, let's talk like adults. I know you're hurt by what happened, but this is going too far. We can fix things." "Marcus, for 6 years, I have acted like an adult, working extra hours to maintain your house while you treated me like I was invisible. Now it's your turn to act like an adult and face the consequences of your actions." I didn't stop to hear his response. I simply walked to my car and drove away. The next tactic was sending Skylar. One afternoon when I got home from work, I found my granddaughter sitting on the steps of my building with her school uniform dirty and tears in her eyes. She had walked 8 blocks from her school to my apartment, something her parents would never have allowed her to do under normal circumstances. "Grandma, Mom says you're going to make us lose our house. Is it true?" Her little eyes were red from crying, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. But then I remembered how those same eyes had looked at me with contempt as she threw grape juice on my dress. "Skylar, tell your mom that adults make adult decisions. This situation is not your responsibility." I walked her back to her house, staying firm despite her tears and innocent questions about why Grandma no longer helped them. When we arrived, Marcus and Tanisha were waiting at the door with expressions that alternated between hope and rage. "Mom, look what you're doing to Skylar. Is this what you want? To see your granddaughter suffer?" Marcus pointed to Skylar, who had clung to Tanisha's leg and was sobbing. "What I don't want is to see my granddaughter grow up thinking that it's okay to disrespect older people because her parents allow it." My words cut the air like broken glass. "Skylar is suffering because you are using her as an emotional pawn instead of teaching her that actions have consequences." That night, someone keyed my car. They had used a key or some sharp object to scratch "egoist" in large letters across the driver's side door. They had also deflated all 4 tires. When I called the police to report the vandalism, the officer who took the report asked me if I had any suspicions about who might have done it. "I have some ideas, but I can't prove it," I replied honestly. The officer nodded with understanding. He had probably seen similar cases of family disputes escalating to acts of vandalism. "Ma'am, I recommend you install security cameras if possible. Cases like these tend to get worse before they get better." His words turned out to be prophetic. The following week, someone put rotten eggs on my door. Then it was balloons filled with red paint that burst against my windows. Each incident was minor enough that the police couldn't do much, but annoying enough to make it clear that someone wanted me to feel harassed in my own home. Marcus started showing up at the places where I worked, waiting for me outside the offices I cleaned at night. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're family. Families don't destroy each other over misunderstandings." But he no longer sounded pleading. Now there was a subtle threat in his voice, an implication that things could get worse if I didn't cooperate. "Marcus, families also don't humiliate their mothers in front of strangers," I replied one night when he intercepted me in an office building parking lot. "If you really want to fix this, you can start by apologizing properly and showing that you understand what you did wrong." "We already apologized. What more do you want?" His frustration was reaching the boiling point. "Marcus, you never apologized. What you did was minimize what happened and tell me it was my fault for being too sensitive." My answer visibly infuriated him. "Fine, we're sorry. Are you happy now? Now take your name off the cosign and stop destroying our lives." He shouted so loud that other employees came out of the building to see what was happening. "That is not an apology, Marcus. That is rage disguised as remorse. A real apology requires understanding why what you did was wrong and showing behavioral changes. not just saying words because you want something in return. I walked away toward my car, leaving him shouting obscenities in the parking lot. That night, when I got home, I found all the tires on my car slashed and the windshield broken. This time, there was no doubt that someone had significantly escalated the situation. The note taped to my door confirmed it. "Last chance, you crazy old woman. Sign the papers or things are going to get worse." For the first time in weeks, I felt a moment of doubt. Had I gone too far? Was all of this worth it just to prove a point? But then I remembered the laughter of my entire family as the grape juice dripped from my dress. I remembered years of being treated like an ATM with legs. I remembered all the humiliations I had silently endured. No, I hadn't gone too far. I was just getting started. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning while I was having breakfast. It was Brenda Miller, the secretary who worked at the construction office where Marcus had been employed until 2 years ago. Brenda had been kind to me during the years Marcus worked there, always asking about my health when I occasionally visited him. "Ms. Estelle, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet in private?" Her voice sounded nervous, as if she feared someone might be listening to the conversation. "It's about Marcus and some documents I found when they were cleaning out the company's old files." We agreed to meet that same afternoon at a small coffee shop near my apartment. Brenda arrived on time, carrying a manila folder she held against her chest as if it contained dangerous secrets. She sat across from me and ordered a coffee with trembling hands before speaking. "Ms. Estelle, what I'm about to show you could get me into trouble, but I think you have the right to know." She opened the folder and took out several photocopied documents. When Marcus worked with us, he handled some of the material and supplier accounts. We found these falsified invoices that he had been submitting to receive reimbursements for materials that were never purchased. The papers she showed me were copies of invoices where Marcus's handwriting had been altered to increase the amounts. A lumber invoice for $300 had been modified to show $1,300. A cement invoice for $200 had been changed to $700. There were at least 15 different documents, each showing clear evidence of fraud. "How much money did he take in total?" I asked. My voice sounded strangely calm considering the magnitude of what I was seeing. "We estimate it was around $8,000 over a 6-month period. The company owner never pressed charges because Marcus was popular among the other employees, and he didn't want to create problems. He just fired him and tried to keep everything quiet." Brenda looked at me with compassion, probably expecting me to react with shock and tears. "Why did you decide to tell me this now, Brenda?" It was a legitimate question. 2 years had passed since Marcus had been fired. "Because yesterday Marcus came to the office trying to convince the boss to give him a letter of recommendation. He said he needed to prove he had been a reliable employee to get a loan from the bank." Brenda lowered her voice and leaned toward me. "Ms. Estelle, he also mentioned that you were being problematic and trying to sabotage his financial stability out of spite." That didn't sound at all like the woman I knew. The pieces began to fit together in my mind with crystal clarity. Marcus had been desperate to get that letter of recommendation because he knew that without the cosigner, he needed to demonstrate stable income and financial reliability to keep the house. He was also trying to construct a narrative where I was the irrational villain, preparing the ground for when the mortgage situation became public. "Can I keep copies of these documents?" Brenda nodded and handed me the entire folder. "There's more, Ms. Estelle. I spoke with Patrice Washington, who worked in human resources when Marcus was employed. She told me that Marcus had been faking overtime hours on his time cards. We also found that he had been selling company tools and pocketing the money." The image emerging of my son was completely different from the one I had held for all these years. He wasn't a young man who had had bad luck with work. He was someone who had been systematically committing fraud, stealing from his employers, and building his lifestyle on lies and stolen money. Does Brenda know other people who worked with Marcus and might have similar information? She nodded and gave me the names and phone numbers of 3 former co-workers who had witnessed Marcus's questionable activities. That night I called the first number. It was Darren Scott, a construction supervisor who had worked directly with Marcus. "Ms. Dupree, your son has serious honesty problems. I was the one who discovered he was stealing tools and selling them online. When I confronted him, he threatened to accuse me of theft if I said anything." The second call was to Patrice Washington, who told me about the faked overtime hours and also about something that chilled me. Marcus used to brag about how he had tricked his mother into co-signing for his house. He would say that you didn't really understand what you were signing and that it was easy to manipulate you because you were afraid of losing your family. Those words hit me like a fist to the stomach. Not only had I been the victim of financial fraud, but I had been the victim of calculated emotional manipulation. Marcus had used my love for him and my fear of loneliness to turn me into his personal financial guarantee. I made the third call to Leonard Bell, an accountant who had handled some of the construction company's accounts. "Ms. Estelle, Marcus asked me to falsify some income documents for him a few months ago. He offered me $500 to create statements that showed income he had never had. Of course, I refused the offer, but I worry that he found someone less scrupulous who agreed to do it." After those calls, I sat in my living room with all the documents spread out on the coffee table. It wasn't just my son who had been deceiving me. It was an entire network of lies and fraud that stretched back years. The money I had been sending them for emergencies had probably been necessary because Marcus had lost jobs due to stealing, not economic bad luck. The next day, I visited Silas Jenkins with all the information I had collected. His eyes progressively widened as he reviewed each document, each testimony, each piece of evidence I had gathered in less than 24 hours. "Estelle, this is very serious. Your son has not only committed fraud against previous employers, but has also defrauded you. This evidence could be sufficient to press criminal charges if you so desire." "Silas, I don't want to press criminal charges against my own son, but I want this information to be legally documented in case Marcus tries to sue me or create legal problems for withdrawing my co-signature." Silas nodded with understanding. "We can prepare a sworn statement with all this evidence and have it ready in case it is necessary. I also suggest we contact the bank to inform them about the fraudulent nature of some of the income documents Marcus may have originally submitted." That afternoon, when I got home, I found Marcus waiting for me in the parking lot. But this time he wasn't alone. He had brought 2 men I didn't recognize, both intimidating looking and aggressive in attitude. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but something inside me told me that running away would give them exactly the reaction they expected. "Mom, these are my friends, Alfred and Manny. They understand business and family, and they think you should reconsider your decision about the house." Marcus sounded different, colder, more calculating than in our previous conversations. One of the men approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Estelle, your son told us about your family situation. We believe in the importance of keeping families together. Maybe we can help resolve this misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, gentlemen. There is a decision I have made after years of being mistreated by my own family." My voice was firm, but my heart was beating rapidly. The second man laughed with a cruel smile. "Ma'am, sometimes older people get confused about what's best for everyone. Maybe you need someone to help you see things more clearly." It was at that moment that I understood Marcus had crossed a line I never thought he would cross. He was willing to use physical intimidation against his own mother to get what he wanted. But what he didn't know was that now I had weapons he had never imagined I possessed. "Marcus, tell your friends to leave, and tell your wife that the threats and vandalism are going to stop right now, or all the information I have about your fraudulent activities will go directly to the relevant authorities." The expression on his face changed immediately. "What are you talking about?" I took out my phone and showed him a photo of one of the falsified documents Brenda had given me. "I'm talking about this and much more. Now get off my property before I call the police." For the first time in our lives, I was the one who held all the power. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal lawsuit filed by Marcus and Tanisha against me, accusing me of malicious family abandonment and intentional destruction of family assets. They had hired a lawyer named Arthur Trevino, who apparently specialized in family disputes and elder manipulation cases. When I showed the documents to Silas, he laughed for the first time since he had started handling my case. "Estelle, this is exactly what we expected them to do. By suing you, they have opened the door for us to present all the evidence we have compiled about Marcus's fraudulent activities." The lawsuit alleged that I had abused my position as co-signer to emotionally manipulate a young family and had used financial blackmail for personal revenge. According to the document, I was a confused, vindictive older woman who was destroying my granddaughter's stability due to irrational resentments. Silas, they really think they're going to win this case? The absurdity of their allegations seemed evident to me, but I knew the legal system sometimes worked in unpredictable ways. Estelle, they don't expect to win this case. What they expect is to pressure you to get scared and withdraw your co-signer cancellation request before we get to trial. It's a legal intimidation tactic. But what they don't know, Silas organized all our documents on his desk, is that we have enough evidence not only to defend ourselves, but to file a counterclaim for fraud and restitution. Preparation for the trial took 3 intense weeks. Silas had contacted Brenda Miller, Darren Scott, Patrice Washington, and Leonard Bell as witnesses. He had also obtained official documents from the bank showing all the payments I had made as co-signer over the past 6 years. A total of $23,400 in payments that Marcus and Tanisha had been unable to cover. On the day of the trial, I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best black suit and carrying a folder with copies of all the evidence. Marcus and Tanisha were sitting on the other side of the room with their lawyer, avoiding eye contact with me. Tanisha was wearing a conservative dress and a practiced victim expression, while Marcus looked tense and nervous. The judge was a woman around 50 years old named Honorable Judge Evelyn Thorne. She had read all the pretrial documents and seemed to have little patience for cases she considered frivolous family disputes. Her first question was direct. "Mr. Trevino, explain to me exactly what Ms. Dupree violated by exercising her legal right to withdraw her co-signature from a mortgage loan." Marcus's lawyer stammered for a moment before responding. "Your Honor, our position is that Ms. Dupree is using this legal right maliciously with the specific intention of causing emotional and financial harm to her family." "I understand your position, Mr. Trevino, but can you cite any legal precedent that establishes that exercising a legal right becomes illegal based on the person's emotional motivations?" The judge was clearly unimpressed with the plaintiff's arguments. When it was Silas's turn to present our defense, he began by showing the complete chronology of my financial support to Marcus and Tanisha. "Your Honor, Ms. Dupree is not acting out of malice. She is acting as any reasonable person would after years of financial and emotional abuse." He presented copies of all the bank transfers I had made, all the mortgage payments I had covered, and all the loans I had granted that had never been repaid. The total amounted to $43,200 over 6 years. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have discovered evidence that Mr. Marcus Dupree has been involved in fraudulent activities that directly affected Ms. Dupree's ability to make informed financial decisions. Silas began presenting the falsified documents that Brenda had found, the sworn statements from Marcus's former co-workers, and the evidence that Marcus had been lying about his income and job stability for years. Marcus's lawyer stood up abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor! This evidence is not relevant to the issue of the mortgage cosign." Judge Thorne looked at him with a severe expression. "Mr. Trevino, you opened the door to the question of character and motivations when you alleged that my client was acting maliciously. Mr. Marcus Dupree's previous conduct is absolutely relevant to establishing a pattern of dishonest behavior toward his mother." Brenda Miller was the first witness to take the stand. She spoke clearly and calmly about the fraudulent documents she had found, about the admissions Marcus had made about manipulating his mother, and about his recent attempt to obtain false letters of recommendation. Ms. Miller, did Mr. Marcus Dupree ever express remorse for defrauding his previous employer? Silas asked. No, sir. In fact, when I spoke with him last week, he told me that his mother was a difficult woman who didn't understand how modern families work. He said she was being selfish for not continuing to support them financially. When Darren Scott testified about the theft of tools and the threats Marcus had made to him, I could see the judge's expression hardening more and more. When Patrice Washington told about the faked overtime hours and Marcus's derogatory comments about my supposed naivete, the judge took extensive notes. The most impactful moment came when Silas called me to the stand to testify. I had practiced my testimony for days, but when the moment came to speak, the words flowed naturally. Your Honor, for 6 years I have worked double shifts, emptied my savings, and mortgaged my financial future to keep afloat a family that treated me like I was invisible. I paid for vacations I was not invited to, for renovations I could not enjoy, for a house where my presence was tolerated but not desired. I described the incident at Tanisha's birthday party, the public humiliation I had suffered, and the years of emotional abuse I had silently endured. Your Honor, the day my own granddaughter threw grape juice on me while my whole family laughed, I finally understood that it wasn't love that kept me helping them. It was fear. Fear of being alone, fear of admitting that the people for whom I had sacrificed everything didn't truly want me. When Marcus's lawyer tried to cross-examine me, his questions focused on trying to paint me as a confused, vindictive older woman. Ms. Dupree, isn't it true that you are doing this out of spite because you felt offended at a family party? No, sir. I am doing this because I finally understood that for years I have been the victim of emotional and financial fraud. My son and his wife built their lifestyle on lies and on my money, and when I tried to set boundaries, they resorted to intimidation and vandalism. I presented the photographs of the damage to my car, the written threats I had received, and testified about the intimidating men Marcus had brought to pressure me. Your Honor, a mother who truly loves her family does not resort to physical intimidation when that family sets reasonable financial boundaries. When all the testimonies ended, the judge retired to deliberate for 1 hour. When she returned, her verdict was clear and unequivocal. This court finds that Ms. Estelle Dupree has acted within her legal rights in withdrawing her co-signature from the mortgage loan in question. Furthermore, this court finds compelling evidence of a pattern of fraudulent and manipulative behavior on the part of Mr. Marcus Dupree toward his mother. The judge ordered that the lawsuit against me be dismissed completely. Furthermore, she ordered that Marcus and Tanisha pay all my legal costs, a total of $4,500. She also issued a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting me or approaching my property for 1 full year. Mr. Marcus Dupree, this court warns that any future harassment or intimidation toward your mother will result in criminal charges. Ms. Dupree has the right to live free from threats and manipulation, even when those threats come from members of her own family. When I left the courthouse that afternoon, Silas shook my hand with a genuine smile. Estelle, you won more than a legal case today. You won your freedom. For the first time in 6 years, I felt completely free. 2 years have passed since the day of the trial. 2 years in which my life has changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. I am sitting in the small coffee shop that I opened with the money I had been spending on keeping Marcus and Tanisha's financial life afloat. Robert's Corner is named after my late husband, and every morning when I open the doors, I feel as if he is here with me, proud of the woman I have finally become. The coffee shop is located downtown, in a space I rent for $900 a month. With the $4,500 that Marcus and Tanisha had to pay me for legal costs, plus the savings I had accumulated by no longer having to cover their expenses, I was able to make the necessary renovations and purchase the initial equipment. It is not a luxurious place, but it is mine. The walls are painted a warm cream color. There are plants in every corner, and soft jazz music creates a cozy atmosphere. I serve fresh coffee, homemade pastries that I bake every morning, and simple sandwiches for lunch. My regular customers include area office workers, college students, and senior couples who come to enjoy a quiet environment. Brenda Miller became my first part-time employee. After she testified on my behalf, she lost her job at the construction office because the boss feared retaliation from other corrupt employees. "Ms. Estelle," she told me when I offered her the job, "working for you is an honor. I finally get to work for someone who values honesty." The coffee shop generates enough income to cover my living expenses and allows me to save a small amount each month. It is not a fortune, but it is honest stability built on my own efforts, not on the manipulation of others. Every dollar that enters my register is clean, earned through hard work and fair dealing with my customers. The mornings are my favorite. I arrive at 5:30 to start baking the day's pastries. The aroma of cinnamon and coffee filling the empty space gives me a feeling of peace I hadn't experienced in years. There is no phone ringing with family financial emergencies, no emotional drama, just the honest work of creating something that makes people happy. My regular customers have become a kind of chosen family. There is Mrs. Hortensia, a 75-year-old woman who comes every Tuesday and Thursday for a latte and tells me about her grandchildren who live in another city. Unlike my experience with Skylar, Mrs. Hortensia talks about her grandchildren with genuine pride, and they call her regularly to ask how she is. There is also Mr. Starr, Manuel, a widowed man my age who comes every morning at 8 o'clock to have breakfast before going to his part-time job at a bookstore. We have developed a friendship based on quiet conversations about books, movies, and life in general. There is no drama, no manipulation, just two adults who enjoy each other's company without toxic expectations. On weekends, I organize small events at the coffee shop, poetry reading nights, board game afternoons for seniors, and book swap sessions. These events attract people who, like me, have discovered that true community is built on mutual respect and shared interests, not on forced family obligations. The restraining order against Marcus and Tanisha expired 6 months ago, but they have made no attempt to contact me. According to the few things I've heard through mutual acquaintances, they lost the house 3 months after the trial. The bank proceeded with the foreclosure exactly as Silas had predicted, and they had to move to a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Marcus got a job at a landscaping company for minimum wage. The only employment he could find after his history of fraud became known in the local construction community. Tanisha had to get a full-time job at a supermarket to help cover basic expenses. Their lifestyle changed drastically, but they are finally living within their real means instead of relying on other people's money. Information about Skylar occasionally reaches me through Mrs. Hortensia, who knows some of the mothers at the school where my granddaughter studies. Skylar adapted to the change better than expected. Apparently, the experience of moving and seeing her parents work hard taught her lessons about responsibility that she had never learned when everything came easily to them. 3 weeks ago, I saw Skylar from the window of my coffee shop. She was walking down the street with a friend, both in school uniforms, laughing about something one of them had said. She had grown into a taller, more mature 10-year-old with a more serious but also more genuine expression. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. Skylar stopped and looked at me for several seconds. I could see recognition in her eyes, but also something that seemed to be understanding. It wasn't the defiant look of the girl who had thrown grape juice on me 2 years ago. It was the look of someone who had learned that actions have consequences and that respect is earned, not demanded. She raised her hand slightly as if to wave to me, but then kept walking. I don't hold resentment toward Skylar. She was just a child being used by adults who didn't know how to teach her proper values. Now she is learning those values through direct experience, which is probably a better teacher than any sermon I could have given. Silas Jenkins comes to visit me once a month, always ordering black coffee and one of my lemon cakes. "Estelle," he told me during his most recent visit, "you are a perfect example of why justice is worth fighting for. You not only defended yourself, but you probably saved that family from continuing down a path that would have led them to much worse consequences." He is right. By forcing Marcus and Tanisha to face financial reality, I gave them the opportunity to build a life based on honesty instead of manipulation and fraud. It's a tough lesson, but one they needed to learn before their problems escalated to more serious legal consequences. My apartment feels different now. It is no longer a refuge where I hide from a family that mistreats me. It is my home, decorated with things I like, full of books I enjoy reading, and visited by people who genuinely value my company. I have plants that I meticulously care for, paintings I chose because they make me smile, and a tranquility that comes from knowing that no one can manipulate my emotions to get my money. On Sundays, instead of sitting through uncomfortable family gatherings, I go to church at a small, predominantly black church near my house. After the service, I often have lunch with other members of the congregation who have become genuine friends. They are people who know me as Estelle, the coffee shop owner, not as Estelle, the mother who can be financially exploited. This morning, as I prepared the coffee for another day of honest work, I looked at myself in the small mirror I have behind the counter. The woman looking back at me was 66 years old, with a few more wrinkles than 2 years ago, but eyes that sparkled with a confidence I hadn't seen in decades. I am not rich. I don't have a big family to celebrate me on holidays. I don't have grandchildren who call me to tell me about their school achievements, but I have something I hadn't had in years: self-respect and control over my own life. The best revenge, as they say, is living well. And for the first time in my adult life, that is exactly what I am doing. This afternoon, as I locked up the coffee shop after another successful day, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. It was Marcus, thinner and in dirty work clothes, watching my cafe from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't try to come in. He just stood there for a few minutes before moving on. In his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: respect, maybe even a little pride. His mother, the woman he had underestimated for so many years, had built something of her own with her own hands. She was no longer the victim he could manipulate. She was an independent businesswoman who had found her own dignity. I locked the cafe door, turned off the lights, and walked home under the afternoon sun. Tomorrow would be another day of honest work, another day of living life on my own terms, and I couldn't be happier. 6 more months have passed, and this November morning I woke up to the news that my coffee shop had been selected as Small Business of the Month by the local Chamber of Commerce. The recognition plaque will arrive next week, along with an article in the local newspaper that will include my photograph and the story of how a 66-year-old woman started her first business. The irony is not lost on me. For decades, no one in my family saw me as capable of achieving anything significant on my own. I was just the older woman they could use to solve their financial problems. Now, strangers recognize me as a successful entrepreneur who has contributed positively to the community. Brenda brought me my coffee this morning with a radiant smile. "Ms. Estelle, my daughter asked me yesterday if you could give her advice on how to open her own bakery. She says you are her inspiration for older women who want to keep growing." I laughed when I heard this, remembering how many times Marcus and Tanisha had insinuated that I was too old to understand the modern world. The Chamber of Commerce recognition includes an invitation to speak at a seminar on entrepreneurship for seniors. Apparently, my story has inspired other people in my age range who believed it was too late to start something new. The event coordinator explained that there is a growing demand for stories like mine, stories of people who found their purpose after 60. Mr. Manuel has become more than a regular customer. Over the last few weeks, we have started taking walks in the park on Sundays after I close the coffee shop. Yesterday, he brought me wildflowers he had picked during his morning walk, a simple gesture, but full of genuine consideration. It is refreshing to be with someone who wants nothing from me except my company. "Estelle," he told me yesterday as we shared a slice of apple pie, "it's admirable how you built all of this after what you went through with your family." We rarely talk about my previous situation, but when we do, he always refers to it with respect and understanding, never with pity or judgment. Last week, I decided to expand the cafe's menu to include more elaborate home-cooked meals. I now serve stews, soups, and traditional dishes that I prepare every morning before opening. The demand has been so high that I am considering hiring another part-time person to help with the cooking. It is strange to think that less than 3 years ago, I was worrying about how to pay my own bills, and now I am creating jobs for others. The weekend events have evolved too. This Saturday, we will have our first story swap night, where customers can share meaningful life experiences. The idea came up when Mrs. Hortensia mentioned that many older people feel invisible in a society that primarily values the young. My cafe has become a space where life experiences are valued as wisdom, not dismissed as irrelevance. Yesterday, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Darren Scott, the construction supervisor who had testified about Marcus's fraudulent activities. He wrote to tell me that Marcus had applied for a job at his new company, but he had rejected the application due to his history. Ms. Estelle, the letter read, I wanted you to know that your brave decision to expose the truth has protected other employers from being defrauded. Your son needed to face real consequences to have any chance of changing. His words made me reflect on something I had been avoiding considering. Had my decision really been beneficial for Marcus in the long run? The answer, I believe, is yes. For years, my constant financial rescues had taught him that he could escape the consequences of his actions. Now, for the first time in his adult life, he is experiencing the direct connection between decisions and results. Brenda told me she saw him last week working in the garden of a house in our neighborhood. He looked tired but focused on his work, something she had never observed in him during the years he worked at the construction office. He looked different, she told me, more serious, as if he finally understood that honest work requires honest effort. 2 weeks ago, while organizing old papers in my apartment, I found a photograph of the family they had taken on the Bahamas vacation that I had paid for. In the image, Marcus, Tanisha, and Skylar were smiling radiantly on the beach, tanned and relaxed, with no indication that those vacations had been financed by someone who wasn't welcome to join them. For the first time, I was able to look at that photograph without feeling pain. Instead, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. Those had been the last vacations funded by unearned money. Any future trips that family took would be paid for with honest work and responsible planning. In a way, my refusal to continue being their unlimited financial source had been the best gift I could have given them. My therapist, Dr. Laura Munoz, suggested that I start writing a journal about this experience. Estelle, she told me during our most recent session, your story could help other people who are living similar situations of family financial abuse. Many people, especially women your age, feel trapped in toxic patterns because they believe they have no options. I have started writing at night after closing the cafe. It is not easy to revisit all those years of manipulation and self-deception, but it is also liberating to put into words what I lived and how I found the strength to change it. Perhaps someday these reflections can become something more formal, a book or a series of articles that help others in similar situations. What surprises me the most about this new phase of my life is how productive I feel. For years, my energy had been constantly drained by family crises and financial emergencies that never ended. Now, that same energy is channeled into creating, building, and contributing in positive ways. It is as if I have discovered reserves of creativity and ambition that had been dormant for decades. Last month, a young reporter from the local newspaper interviewed me for an article on women entrepreneurs. During the conversation, she asked me if I ever regretted the drastic decisions I had made with my family. My answer was immediate. The only regret I have is waiting so long to properly value myself. That sentence became the featured quote in the article, and since then, several women have come to the cafe specifically to meet me and tell me their own stories of difficult family relationships. It is comforting to know that I am not alone in having experienced these kinds of situations, and it is empowering to be able to offer my story as an example that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. This morning, as I prepared the pastries for the day, I realized that November had arrived without me even thinking about the approaching Christmas holidays. For decades, this time of year had been a source of anxiety because it meant more family expenses, more gifts that wouldn't be appreciated, more gatherings where I would be treated as an unwanted guest in my own family. This year will be different. Brenda and I have planned to decorate the cafe for Christmas and offer seasonal specialties. Mr. Manuel mentioned that he has no specific plans for Christmas Eve, and Mrs. Hortensia commented that her children will not be able to visit her this year. I am considering organizing a small Christmas dinner at the cafe for regular customers who, like me, have created their own definitions of family based on mutual kindness and respect. The truth is, I feel happier and more complete now at 66 than I have felt since I was 20. It is a different kind of happiness than the one I had sought for so many years. It doesn't depend on the approval of others or on feeling needed. It comes from within, from knowing that I have built something valuable with my own hands and that I have finally learned to respect myself. Tomorrow will begin another day of work at